Given the circumstances, I'm not sure if I'm ever going to feel safe. I probably shouldn't have laid my eyes on that thing, or what I once thought was a woman. To all of you reading this, I won't give you my name, or number, or address, or whatever means you wish to contact me, so don't bother asking. There's no point in doing so anyway. For now, I'll stick with the usual alias, John Doe. What started as what I expected to be a beautiful tourist vacation at one of the most historical sites ends up becoming one of the most horrendous decisions I've ever made. You see, it all started with a simple trip to Japan, specifically Kyoto and Miyazaki. My time in Kyoto was relaxing, and I got to visit some old shrines, let alone walk the paths that lead to them. From what I could tell, people still take care of the old temple that I visited. I got to learn about the art of making tea and what their customs are in regards to tea ceremonies. I'm not going to lie, it was an experience I will never forget. I enjoyed every moment I had at that place. Other than the nearby cities and busy streets in Kyoto, there were breathtaking sceneries and historical places to visit. The last on the list during my tourist vacation was Miyazaki. I wish that Kyoto was the only place that I decided to visit before leaving, because now, I wish I hadn't gone to my second and last destination. Whilst I admired the countryside and the people who lived there, this place was where my unfortunate encounter occurred. I just didn't understand why, though. I'm only a tourist there, and after learning more of the backstory of this evil thing, it was said that this entity is mostly known to target children and locals. But even tourists are a target of its liking, it seems, since I now have to deal with it. To start this off, while I was in Miyazaki, I got to enjoy the view of the mountainside, and I got to walk in the forest nearby. There was a pathway that I could take that leads in and out. Along with that, there were some nearby hedges where one part of the pathway led to. Now, to my utmost regret, I decided to go through that pathway that leads through the hedges. Those hedges were pretty tall, so I could not see anyone else walking on the pathway other than in front of me and behind me. There was no one else in the area, which was interesting. After seeing a place like this, I would have thought that this area would be a hotspot for tourists to pay a visit. But this is where my encounter began, and perhaps it explains why not many tourists go to this area. While I was walking through the hedges, I eventually came across someone walking in the opposite direction. While the person was distant, I was able to make out a white dress along with a white hat. I also noticed that this person appeared unusually tall, perhaps 8 feet. As I got closer and closer to the figure, my assumptions were confirmed. This person appeared to be a woman, wearing a white dress and a white hat, which appeared longer on all sides. She was also very tall. Her head was just as high as the top of the hedges. This astonished me. How can someone be that tall? After walking closer to her, I suddenly hear this strange sound coming from her. What was off about this ordeal was not only the repetition of the sound, but the sound itself she was making. This sound of hers, it did not seem to be the sounds of a woman, but from a man with a deep, masculine voice. As I got close enough, I stopped to see if I could get a better look. Shockingly, the woman did the same thing. Even stranger was this sudden feeling of dread and terror creeping up on me, as if telling me that I was in grave danger. Realizing my surroundings, the woman was looking down at the ground, not making eye contact. This was odd at first, until she turned her head to look up at me. Never in my life had I felt so horrified. But at the same time, I could not explain this feeling of horror and dread. The woman did not seem normal. Her face was very pale, and she had these red pupils in her eyes. She was looking right at me. This at first made me smile for a quick second, and then frown, as my pretentious greeting was quickly replaced by the feeling of dread. Then, to add to my horror, she gave me a very, very big smile. It was so big, it looked like it was about to stretch from ear to ear. Suddenly, I felt this chilling sensation, telling me that I was about to die. This went on for a few moments, until she eventually turned her head back down and walked right past me, emitting that strange sound once again.
Poo, 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 poo.
As we got far away from each other, the sound, it finally faded into the distance. Nevertheless, I decided to find my way back out. Still, I felt terrified of that incident. In time, I came out of that maze of hedges, and I walked towards a local village. Some of the locals, they were astonished to see me, but it wasn't a happy greeting. One local, who appeared to be an elderly man and was busy picking rice from his field, he uttered something strange. Since I took a bit of Japanese, I understood what he said, which made yet another chill run through my body. Not many people come out of there alive when they see her. He must be lucky if he saw her, or if she wasn't there. "Excuse me?" I spoke back, in his native tongue. "You understood me?" the old man said. "Yes. What did you mean by that?" I asked the old man, desperate to get answers as to what happened. "It sounds like you have never heard of the legend of the 8-foot-tall woman. Seemingly, that you're a tourist visiting this place. I'm not surprised," he said. "What does this have to do with that tall lady I saw earlier?" I then asked. "Tell me, was she making a strange sound?" he asked. As soon as I confirmed what he said, he turned to look at me, now showing a serious face. He went on to tell me of this entity and how she appears to her victims. After hearing everything about her, I could feel my stomach drop like an anchor. It was that woman. But why, though? Why didn't she do it? Why didn't she take the opportunity to take me away and make me disappear from this world? The moment she looks at you and smiles, you are liked by her. This means, in time, you will be taken. The fact you are still here means that she decided not to press on yet," the man explained. Against my better judgment, I decided that I didn't want to hear anymore. I admit, I couldn't take any more of it. After hearing about what had happened to the last group of people who encountered her, and the fact that I'm next on her list, I just couldn't bear it. But as I was about to walk away, trying to get my mind off of what I saw, just thinking it might have been someone pulling a prank on me, the old man insisted on something that caught my attention. I strongly suggest you place 4 bowls of salt in the corners of wherever you sleep. Make sure you have a Buddha statue sitting on a table or a shelf if possible. If you do not heed these instructions, then she will come for you, and no one will know that you even existed. I should have listened. I guess he was right. I was such an ignorant fool, not listening at all. After I read and researched about this 8-foot-tall entity, I read articles pointing out that this thing is just an urban legend, or perhaps a mythical tale made up to scare children who do bad things or misbehave. After my time in Miyazaki, I went back to Tokyo. It was a long trip back, but it was still better than being in that place. However, my trip back was not comforting, to say the very least. In my peripheral, I saw someone in the distance. I glanced to see who it was, only to see it was that same woman that I'd seen in the maze of hedges. My heart began to pound once I laid eyes on her. She looked at me and gave me that big, creepy smile. I turned to look away, and I kept my head down so as not to make any eye contact. I didn't dare turn my head back up and look out the window. Dare I see that thing again? Soon as I was finally back in the city, I was comfortable enough to look around and not see the woman. I went to grab a bite to eat at a nearby restaurant before calling it a night. This was my last night here after all, since I have to fly back tomorrow in the morning. While I was second in line to order, I saw a familiar face. No, it wasn't the woman. In fact, it was something much more pleasant than that. It was someone I recognized from back home at my university. He was an exchange student from this country. My old friend, whom I'll call Toshi. It's not his real name, of course, but it's the same reason I told you in the beginning. The fact I'm seeing him again, it made me happy to see that he was doing okay. Unfortunately, I blame myself for making this night the last night of his life. As he turned to look at me, he got a good look and immediately recognized me. "John?" he said, and I nodded. It didn't take long for him to embrace me with a hug. He and I have been best friends since our time in uni, but ever since a family emergency, he had to leave and come back home. Sadly, he never came back, because the pandemic struck shortly after. To see his face again, it brought joy to my eyes. Apparently, this made me forget the whole ordeal with the 8-foot-tall entity. Normally, I would be thankful for that. But sadly, this led to an unfortunate situation that I still blame myself, even to this day. We exchanged thoughts for a few hours, speaking of our times in our home countries, telling me that he'd been keeping himself busy throughout his days. I told him about the time we shared a room and how his loud snoring sometimes kept me up at night, and he laughed about it. He mentioned that Japan isn't some place you would think working here is fun and games. People work themselves to death, even just for the sake of making their bosses happy and proud. This is not the case in Australia, and it sounded to me that Japan is a country of workaholics. So it interested me to hear what life is like when you're living here. To finish our night, we drank some sake, although I admit I drank a little too much, and I was drunk as hell to even go back to my hotel. Luckily, he told me that his place is nearby, and he allowed me to stay the night. I understood this and nodded, since I couldn't speak so well at this point. As soon as we got to his place, he helped me walk into his house. From what I could tell, he was living in a traditional Japanese home instead of a modern home or apartment. He helped me walk into a room. Sadly, there were no beds in sight, but there was a small blanket with what I assumed to be a pillow. I laid down on it, and he made his way to his bedroom. When I sat up, my vision was a bit hazy, but I was able to make out some things. I looked around, and I noticed that this room had 4 bowls of salt in the corners, a window, and in the center of the room, a small wooden table with a Buddha statue. This was very interesting at first, but upon looking at these things, I felt struck with a sense of familiarity. But then again, I couldn't keep my mind on it, since I was not only drunk, but ready to pass out. Eventually, after a few moments, I fell asleep and I felt my head land on the pillow. I awoke to the sound of tapping on the window. I took out my phone and I saw that the time was now 2:34 in the morning. I also felt sober now too, upon waking up. I looked to the source of the sound, only to see someone on the other side of the window, tapping on it. A familiar sound came through. "Hey, John, it's me, Toshi. Can you let me in through the front door? I locked myself out." I remember him taking me to this room and walking outside, and I thought, damn, he was so drunk that he must have locked himself out and forgot his house keys. I stood up and took another look at who I thought was Toshi. "Good, you're up. Please, open the front door for me." I was about to do this when something was off. I could hear snoring, that familiar snoring sound. It was coming from what I assumed to be Toshi's room. He was sleeping. "Open the front door, John," it said, now in an angry tone. The voice also sounded different now. When I turned to look at the figure, I got a good look at the silhouette. This thing outside had long hair, and the realization hit me. Toshi is bald. He shaves his head every day. If that's not Toshi, who the hell is it? Since I couldn't see a face, I immediately took out my phone and turned the flashlight on. As soon as I pointed my flashlight directly at the figure, I fell backwards, screaming. This was a woman, but not just any woman. It was the same woman, only this time she appeared a bit different. She still had that pale face and red pupils, but this time her mouth was wide open. She had teeth that appeared to be very sharp and carnivorous, and behind it was nothing but a gaping void in her mouth. She was tapping at the window with a smile that was wide and her mouth open, staring at me. "Open the door, John," it said, mocking my friend's voice. Right at that moment, she simply moved away from the window. I thought after that it was all over, but after several long moments, that hopeful feeling was quickly washed away. "Open this door and let me in, John," she said, now knocking on the door to my room. She was now speaking in a much deeper, more masculine voice, followed by those strange sounds she made back at the hedges. From what I could tell, she sounded like she was walking left and right in front of the bedroom door, all while emitting those sounds and the constant knocking. "Get away from me," I yelled at her. "But I only want to talk to you. It's been a while since I've seen you," she said with the sound of Toshi's voice. Apparently, This entity was mocking me and trying to get me to come out. The snoring sound stopped, and I heard yet a more familiar voice. "Who's there?" Toshi yelled. This drew the attention of the woman because she stopped emitting the sounds and knocking on the door. That's when I heard a door open and Toshi came out to check on me. "John, are you..." He stopped, dead in his tracks. I could imagine what he was looking at. A scream was the last thing I heard before hearing his footsteps take off from me. What followed was a horrible, guttural roar, along with another sound of footsteps chasing after him. A loud roaring sound could be heard again, followed by a blood-curdling scream. Shortly after that, nothing. I looked out to the window, only to see nothing but the night sky, along with the moonlight shining through. Everything went quiet, save for the sound of wind outside. Nevertheless, I dare not open that door, nor peek out that window. Eventually, I fall asleep. Morning came, and I woke up. While I was still shaken from last night's event, I was happy to see the sunlight through that window. I very hesitantly opened the door to my bedroom, but thankfully, no one was there. I slowly but cautiously crept through the hallway and into the living room, all the while believing she's going to jump out at me any moment. But nothing happened. As soon as I got to the living room, I was met with the most horrifying sight. There was blood everywhere in the living room. But the most horrifying of all was seeing my friend's head next to the couch. His face looked like he had seen the devil. Out of instinct, I immediately took out my phone to call the police. After a few minutes of waiting, they arrived. I told them everything that happened, including what I'd seen. None of them believed me, of course. That was until one of them came out of the room, holding one of the bowls of salt. The salt in that bowl had turned completely black. While my story still wasn't bought, it was said that when the bowl of salt turns black, it means that an evil presence is nearby. However, because there was a lack of evidence leading to the 8-foot-tall thing being the culprit, it was assumed to be a wild animal. More specifically, a Yizzo brown bear. My mind, however, was clear as day as what it was. I know what I saw, and that was no bear. It's been a few days now since what happened. I'm back in my home country. Normally, I would be safe and sound, since I'm far away from that country. I wouldn't have suspected her to be following me to my homeland. But strangely, I get that chilling feeling that she isn't through with me. Not only that, I also pray that my friend is given a proper resting place. It's my fault that he's dead now. If only I had recalled what I'd seen and told him about it. Then, perhaps he would still be alive, since he would have stayed with me in that room. We'd both be okay then. It saddens me to realize that he's gone now. It makes me feel so guilty. And now I think it should have been me that she took. He didn't deserve it. But the old man was right. I was an ignorant tourist. I'm in the back seat of my car, with my wife driving us home, and our son sitting in the front seat. As I said, I've had this chilling feeling that she is not through with me. What horrified me is the chance that I was right. My suspicions were confirmed. As soon as I laid eyes on someone through the window of the back of our car. I noticed a familiar appearance, one that brought yet another chill through my spine. Just out the window, there was a woman who appeared to be 8 feet tall, and she was wearing a white dress and a large straw hat. Just at that moment, after looking at her and observing her appearance, she took one look at me, observing me with a pale face and red pupils in her eyes, staring at me with a very, very big smile.